Hello and welcome to this edition of Live from NOIRLab. I'm your host, Rob Sparks. In the chat room, we have our moderator, Jamika Marshall. Our guest today is Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan, who will be talking about information on Tohono O'odham history and culture. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can enter them in the chat box and we will relay them to Jacelle so she can address them for you. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Kitt Peak National Observatory. Kitt Peak is funded by the National Science Foundation and is a NOIRLab facility. It was founded in 1958 and is located on land leased from the Tohono O'odham Nation. We are indebted to them for letting us use one of their sacred mountains for astronomical research. Kitt Peak is home to over 2 dozen optical telescopes and 2 radio telescopes. So now I'd like to share a little bit of recent news. Yes, my cat is very interested in the recent news, as you might be hearing at this point, from there was partly done on Kitt Peak. Some exoplanet researchers could be missing nearly half the Earth-sized planets around other stars. New findings from a team using the International Gemini Observatory and the WIN 3.5-meter telescope at Kitt Peak National Observatory suggest that Earth-sized worlds could be lurking undiscovered in binary star systems, hidden in the glare of their parent stars. As roughly half the stars in binary systems, this means astronomers could be missing many Earth-sized worlds. Earth-sized planets may be much more common than had previously realized. Astronomers working at NASA Ames Research Center use the twin telescopes of Gemini and the WIN telescope to determine that many planet-hosting stars identified the TESS exoplanet, NASA's TESS exoplanet hunting mission, are actually pairs of stars. So they look like one stars, but then we followed up and found they were pairs of stars known as binary stars. When the planets orbit one of the stars in the pair, after examining these binary stars, teams conclude that the Earth-sized planets in many two-star systems might be going unnoticed by transit searches like TESS's, which look for changes in light from a star when a planet passes in front of it. The light from the second star makes it more difficult to detect these changes in the host star's brightness when the planet transits, hence the planets get missed. There was a recent press release on this, and if Jamika can find that, she can put that in the chat so you can follow up on it. It's a very interesting finding, and I hope to see more on this in the future. And I also did an episode of 365 Days Astronomy podcast interviewing the PI of this study, Katie Lester, which aired on July 10th. So if you want to go to 365daysofastronomy.org, you can find that podcast as well and learn more about this. Now to introduce our guest. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan is a Tohono O'odham and from the San Javier district. She is currently a doctoral candidate in the American Indian Studies program with a minor in journalism and faculty in the Tohono O'odham Studies program at Tohono O'odham Community College. Jacelle has served as on the American Indian Studies Graduate Student Council as president and vice president. She is currently a mentor for the Tohono O'odham Student Association at the University of Arizona. Jacelle is an information specialist for AURA/NOIRLab, closely working with Kitt Peak National Observatory. In May 2016, Jacelle earned her MA in American Indian Studies and wrote a biographical life history on the late Southwest anthropologist Dr. Bernard Bunny Fontana for her thesis. For her dissertation, Jacelle is writing about the history of land and water in the San Javier district. Jacelle is a 2-time graduate of the American Indian Journalism Institute, CHIP's Quinn Scholars Program for Diversity in Journalism, and the New York Times Student Journalism Institute. She has written for news publications in Arizona, New Mexico, Washington State, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Florida, and New York. She was a freelance journalist for Indian Country Today Media Network from 2009 to 2017. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Jacelle to our program. Hello, Jacelle.
Hello, hi. Thank you for the introduction.
Yes, that's quite a resume you have there, to say the least. And it's only going to get more impressive as time goes on, I'm sure. Anyway, you may start sharing your presentation. I will mute out my audio and video at this point.
Thanks, Rob. And when I start my any presentation or anything that I do, I always start with my introduction and the O'odham language. So, Skutash, Anya Jugi, Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan, Kajabwak, Amachit, Anya Nod, PhD candidate, Kacha, Marshkamatam, Kacha, Ahonadam, Kacha, Kacha, Jisk, Kacha, mentor. So what I said is, good day. My name is Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan. I come from the San Javier district on the Tohono O'odham Nation. And as Rob mentioned, I wear many different hats and I do many different things. I am a PhD candidate and with my research, being within my community, which is very exciting. Um, and I recently became full-time faculty at Tohono O'odham Community College within the Tohono O'odham Studies program. Prior to that, I was adjunct, and I would teach, whenever it fit into my schedule. But it's really great to be in this new position that I'm in. And I'm also a mom and a very proud auntie, and I serve as mentor. I don't do as much freelance journalism as I would like to, but hopefully when I'm done with my degree, I can kind of get back into some of those things that I had to take a break from. And then also to being a mentor and really helping and working with not only O'odham youth, but also, Native American youth and any that, want to pursue a higher education. I really like speaking to them and sharing my educational journey. And then, of course, also too, as part of my job, working with NOIRLab and Kitt Peak National Observatory, is having presentations like this to share what I can with the public about my tribe, the Tohono O'odham Nation, and our history and our culture, so you have a better idea and learn, about us. And so, with that said, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I have my presentation that I'll get started with. Okay. So, like I mentioned, all these different roles that I have. Here's a photo of myself that was in the Washington Post. And this is a picture of me in my traditional dress. And I'm holding what is called a guiput. So right now, it's our time to harvest saguaro fruit. And a guiput is what we use to be able to get the fruit down from the saguaros. And I'll talk more about that. But again, just I like to show visuals. I like to, you know, be able to have photos throughout my presentation so you see what I'm talking about. And this was taken in Sorrel National Park West. So, starting at the very beginning with talking about as O'odham, where do we come from? And so we believe to be descendants of the Huka, and also, in anthropologically referred to as Hohokam, but we say Huhukam. And the Huhukam were prehistoric North American people that lived between 200 to 1450 AD. And my ancestors occupied a big area of south central Arizona from Flagstaff to the Mexico border, mainly along Gila and Salt rivers. And the word Huukam in O'odham and Pima language means those who have vanished, because um, we have our traditional stories talking about our ancestors and what happened, but then also too there's other theories, more so from like an anthropological viewpoint of what happened, and to our ancestors, which range from disease came and wiped them out. Another one is that they simply migrated and joined other tribes and then intermarried. And another one is that there was, a drought, a really bad drought that happened, and, everybody died. So there's all these, different viewpoints of what happened. And another thing I want to point out is that I don't speak for the whole Tohono O'odham Nation. I'm speaking from my own personal knowledge that I've, um, learned from my family and O'odham elders. And so, there's things that I can share publicly, but there's also things too that only can be shared with other tribal members. And so, just stating that and letting you know that up front. And so in this map that you see on your screen that shows you the ancestral land, that kind of gray, blue, dark area, and looking at the fact that, we our ancestors, lived along rivers. And if you Google or you do any research on the Hookam, you will see that they built very intricate canal systems, and being able to divert water into their villages, communities, and take what they needed for farming, and other, drinking and whatnot, and then be able to then have it kind of go back into the river. So, and these canals were huge, and it just fascinates me. And I talk about this in my classes all the time of like, could you imagine that long ago? And, there wasn't tractors, there weren't bulldozers, there weren't anything like that. So having your hands and, making tools out of what's in the environment and building these huge canals that were 6 feet deep. And some of the photos that I've seen over time and shared also, you have someone who's 6 foot standing within these in a canal and showing you just how deep they are. And again, being our ancestors were smart, and they were being resourceful. And that's one of the things within my culture is that you only take what you need. You don't take more, because there's other people, there's other animals and plants that need nourishment as well. So that's a big part of how I grew up, and what I was taught. And you can see that with my ancestors. With, yes, they lived along the rivers, but again, being smart about how they take water and how much they take of the water. Um, and then in Sanavir, there are O'odham that say that they're descendants of the Svipari or Sopapiri. And there's research being done with Dr. Danny Seymour and folks that are community members or work at the Sanavir district office. And the Svipari were an Upper Pima group which occupied southern Arizona and northern Sonora in the 14 to 1800s. And they were a subgroup of O'odham or Pima, and then surviving members, which include the Tohono O'odham. And so, again, just sharing where we come from and who we come from, and even more so talking about water, in Sanavir, our our reservation that is there, and my community that's there, where we're situated. We used to have the river, the Santa Cruz River flowing, and that was a big source of water for us. And whereas other parts of the parcels that make up the Tohono O'odham Nation, and our ancestral lands, didn't necessarily have a river flowing right next to it like that. But as you move further down, Gila River and Salt River, you did have that. So just wanting to kind of give you more of a perspective, and also too, how diverse and how much the land changes, as you drive from the Sanavir district, all the way out on 86 to the main part of our reservation and further out. And if you've ever taken that drive, you can see how the terrain changes. And so, early life of O'odham. So this is going along with what I was just talking about, where there were different groups. So you had O'odham that were river people, those that were semi-nomadic, and then hunter and gatherers. And in Sanavir, because we had the Santa Cruz River right there, we were considered Akimet O'odham, and which are river people. And in our community, we've been farming and being able to have not only the river but aquifers as well. And so as you head to the main part of our reservation, tribal members were a long time ago considered semi-nomadic. So as you enter into the main part of our reservation, you start to see that, you have mountains and how it looks there. And so you would have, you know, a summer home, and which would be considered, field villages, and that would be near the water. And then during the winter, you would stay in the well villages by mountain springs. But also, too, thinking about being by the mountain, and in the winter, you have the shelter of the mountain to help block, any cold winds, or if also too, if it rained, then you could collect the water that came off from the mountain. So there were reasons for having a field village or a well village, and where those were situated. And then as you move further west, past Cells, in between Cells and Ajo, when you have Organ Pipe National Monument, everything right in that area, it kind of flattens out, and you kind of have not necessarily barren, but a very open terrain there. And so that's where you'd have hunter and gatherers that were in that area. So again, if you ever get a chance to take the drive, or maybe you go to, Mexico, to Puerto Penasco, Rocky Point, next trip you take and you drive out that way, pay attention to the surroundings, pay attention to the land and the terrain and how it changes. And, that was something that a colleague of mine who is O'odham, we presented in a class, and we were talking about, our water sources. And me being from Sanavir, talking about, well, we had aquifers, we had the river, but where my colleague was from on the main part of the reservation, there wasn't any of that going on or near her. And so just sharing with individuals again how diverse our land is, and just how O'odham once lived, long ago. And there's different groups of O'odham, and we were all one at one point in time. But when Father Kino and Spaniards came, they started naming us differently. So a lot of times I get the question, how are we related to Gila River, Pima, Salt River, Maricopa, Pima, Akchin. And again, we were all one group. But then when Father Kino came in, and having a language barrier, among other things, he thought that we were different groups because of how vast our ancestral land was and how big it is. And little did he realize that that wasn't the case. So, you do have Tohono O'odham, which means desert people. And then you have Ahmed O'odham, which includes Sanavir, Gila River Pima, and Salt River Pima. And then you have Akchin O'odham, which is mouth of the wash people. And then Hyachet O'odham, sand people, but they're not federally recognized. And then, what I mentioned before about the Swipery or Sopapiri O'odham, which translates to being like the enemy. So, but the Swipery are part of Sanavir. And so looking at today, though, who are federally recognized, and I always want to clarify that, and always mentioning that to anybody that asks or is curious, if for Gila River and Salt River, again, all similar. Yes, some things vary within our culture and traditions, but somebody who's from Salt River, Tohono, and Gila River can all have a conversation in O'odham. We just have different dialects. Things are said just a little bit differently. And there again, things are vary just a little bit with stories, with how things are done. But again, we're all related, and then just talking too about the other groups as well. So just to clarify that with you all. And then I'm a big person. I like a big person on photos, and I like to share as much as I can. And here's a photo of my great great grandmother, Martina Arnita, and she was a basket maker. And so I wanted to share this photo with you. Um, she was originally from the main part of our reservation, Santa Rosa, but her and my great great grandfather William moved to Sanavir, and so um, again, just a little bit about myself and my family. And she lived to be over 100 years old. And uh, you know, just hearing about her, and it wasn't until probably I was a little bit older, I want to say maybe in early 20s, when I finally saw a photo of her for the very first time. And this was the photo, and I had it printed and framed, and I have it, I need to put it actually up in my office, just as, you know, a reminder, and having her there and being with me every day. So talking more about um, our culture, and we have a way of life, and it's called our himatag, and it consists of not only our culture, our way of life, but the values that, you know, we hold and, you know, are displayed uniquely by the Tohono O'odham. You know, our himatag incorporates everything in life that makes us, you know, who we are as individuals and as people and as a tribe. um you know, and it's a lifelong journey. And a big part of our himatag is that it's defined differently by each individual. So, you know, you could ask five different Optum, and there may be similarities, but everybody has their own definition, their own way of describing our Himathug. And um, at the Thanatam Community College, Himathug is a big part of the school. We have a committee, but also to incorporating that into all of our classes. And, you know, it can be anything from, you know, our language, songs, storytelling, you know, your values, history, you know, it just encompasses so much. And again, it's up to each individual how they want to define that, how they want to look at it. And you know, anytime you come onto the reservation, or even, you know, anything relating to us, you will see the man in the maze. And that depicts our journey, our life's journey. And yeah, it's called Man in the Maze, but you know, it's also been called a labyrinth. And looking at the how it looks and everything we have to go through in life and what that entails. And so you know, that's what it means. And um you know, and we believe that everything has a spirit, and we treat everything with respect. You know, whether that's a plant, that's an animal, um you know, what have you. That's how we look at things. And, you know, within our stories that we have, um you know, a long time ago, animals interacted with humans, they talk to each other, you know, and we have animals that are a part of our creation story as well. You know, so just to kind of give you a little bit more insight, and also to our creator Itoy, he put us on the land, which we, on this earth that we call Jewwood, to be caretakers. You know, we don't own the land. We're here to again take care of it, and do what it was asked of us by our creator. And we also believe that our ancestral land, the O'odham Jewwood, which translates to the people's land or earth, is the center of the world. Excuse me. And you know, we're very fortunate to be where we are. And with looking even further into American Indian history, we were or are very fortunate to never have been removed from our ancestral land, unlike other um, Native American tribes and nations that had been. Um, and so when you see the man of the maze, remember that, it's not just a symbol that represents um, my tribe as a whole. It represents so much more, and shares, a glimpse of to what our life journey is, with being where the man is where you enter into the world, and the solid in the middle being, where you meet death and you pass away. And then another part of our Humathug is, our calendar, and how we look at our seasons and what that entails. And for us, our new year isn't in January. Our new year is actually a season, and that season is June and July. And um, that's because it's when we pick swirl fruit, also called bayathatch. And, as I showed you in that picture at the very beginning, we go and we pick in June, July time, um, and usually before the monsoon rains hit. And, we harvest it. And that guiput, that stick or pole, however you want to reference it, that you saw me holding, is actually made from the swirl. It's swirl ribs. So everything has a meaning. And so here we are picking swirl fruit with, our kuiput made out of swirl ribs. And after we pick the swirl fruit, the peel of it we leave and give at the bottom of the swirl and give thanks. And then also too, we leave those for insects and other animals who aren't, don't have wings, don't have accessibility to get up and actually taste the fruit themselves, but also too, so that way those peels then go back into the ground, into the roots of the swirl, and nourish it. So then the next year, the swirl can have even more, um, you know, flowers, which then turn into the fruit for us to harvest. So there's like a whole process, and the way things are done, and the way we see things. And even more so, when we pick and we have our gui, but part of it is not, yes, we're picking the sorrel fruit, but also too, we're pulling down the clouds. We're pulling those clouds down, so then that way we can you know welcome the rains and have those monsoons come. Because living in the desert, um you know our monsoon season is super important. And we need it to be able to um survive, not only meaning people, but the plants, the animals, the dirt, the cactus. Everybody needs it. And the autumn word for a sorrel cactus is harshan. And so you may wonder, what do we do with the swirl fruit? So we harvest it and we make it into syrup, jam, and ceremonial wine. And we actually do have a ceremony, that a rain ceremony. And that has many different steps and takes place over so many days. And again, it's in preparation to sing and bring the rain and welcome the rain. And um and also too, when you're thinking about the desert and being able to call the rains, it's something very powerful that we're able to do through song, through prayer, through the act of going and picking the sorrel fruit and being able to pull those clouds down. And our gui butts are really long, so when you're out there and you're looking up and you're pulling the fruit down, you can see how you're able to pull the clouds down as well, you know. And it's something I've done for as long as I can remember with my family. And it's, you know, really summertime is the most beautiful time, I think, in the desert, especially because we get to harvest, but also because it just the rains and you know, being able to uh, give thanks for uh, you know, mother nature to be able to provide us with what she does. And also, if you're looking at this our chart as I've been talking, um, it gives you an idea of how we see things. And again, a lot of it has to do with the seasons and also with planting. Because a long time ago, you know, we didn't have phones, we didn't have, you know, technology to help us. Again, we had to pay attention to the environment and how it was changing, and also to paying attention to the phases of the moon. And so, right now we are in July, so Dukabik Mashat, which means big rains moon, or also referred to as month, because what happens right now, monsoons. And then last month, Hashram Bat Kamashat, swallow fruit ripening moon. And so, you know, typically June is when we go out and pick, and then, you know, we start welcoming the rains typically around July 4th or by July 4th. So, and then as you start to look at the rest of the months, and, you know, you see how, um, see and understand why they're named that. So, for example, April, Wan Mashat, yellow moon month. So, what happens in April? You know, you start to see, you know, blooming, and then also too, there's always plenty of yellow flowers, and you know, especially if you ever drive on Highway 86, there's tons of yellow flowers that come out along the roadsides. You know, so you springtime, you know, when you start paying attention to that. Um, and so also too, um, you know, looking at some of the other times of the month, we have Shupajik Masha, which is big cold moon. So December typically is, you know, one of the coldest times here. That's our winter, December, January. Um, you know, and paying attention to that and understanding that, and, you know, putting this calendar together to share that with you all. And also to, again, starting in this June July season, unlike most in, you know, Western society, followed by January to December. So, and also too, a long time ago we used to have a record keeper. And so in the different villages and communities, you would have somebody that would keep record and know what's going on, and being able to track if maybe one season you had um, you know, very little rainfall, and then, you know, the next year you had um, you know, very little crop. Well, you know, why did that happen? And so here's a replica of what a calendar stick looked like, that a record keeper would make. And, you know, it was up to their discretion on how they wanted to keep record, if it was through symbols, if, you know, they wanted to kind of have their own code that they wanted to put, you know, create and put together, they could do that too. You know, it, again, it was up to them. And so, but going back to the saguaro fruit harvest, here are pictures. Um, these are my nieces, well, three of them picking. And then also to looking at talking about the peel. So when you have the saguaro fruit, it it's like an orange, best way and to explain it. It has a covering, has a peel on it. So sometimes they're already cracked open, other times they're not, and it has a stem on the top of it, and you can use that stem to break off and use it as a knife, and you cut it open and you're able to get the fruit inside. And the black, those are seeds. And so you can actually eat this raw, and it's delicious. And I've been asked, what does it taste like? And I really didn't know what to describe it as, but the closest thing I could think of is maybe like a strawberry or a type of berry. Um, and so the peel is what we leave behind, as I mentioned. And so we scoop out everything in the middle, and then in the bucket is what it looks like without the peel. And every year it's different on what we pick, how much we pick. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier about never taking more than we need. So we go out there, and I don't know, it's just a feeling, is the best way I can explain it, and talking about, knowing just how much is enough, and then going back home and being able to harvest it. So is there a question? Yeah.
Yes, we sure do have some questions from the chat, Jacelle. Thank you so much. So first, Half Astro says that there's been some news coverage of the unusual side blooms of the, can you pronounce the name of the plant again? The saguaro?
Yeah.
And he says, the question is, has that unusual side bloom impacted the harvest at all this year?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I was interviewed for the Washington Post article in relating to that, and talking about that. And no, it hasn't. And the article, which I'm happy to share, or you could even just Google Washington Post and my name, and it'll show up. And I wondered about that too, but excuse me, within I'm trying to get over being sick, so I'm sorry. Within the interview, I was really thinking about those questions, and of course, it caught my attention about saguaros in Saguaro National Park East that were blooming out of season, and it was just kind of like, what's going on, But within the Tohono O'odham culture, saguaros used to be people, so they are our ancestors. And I really thought hard about what the journalist was asking me at the time. And I think that the saguaros were feeling what we have been feeling throughout this pandemic. And there's just a lot that's been going on. And with, with COVID and everything else. And I think they certainly felt that, and feeling what's been happening. And I was really interested to see too if it would have affected us. But I've never seen a harvest like this in quite some time. We harvested quite a lot within excuse me, one trip out.
Oh wow, Jacelle, that's amazing, and I really appreciate the detailed response. And yes, I just dropped the link to your Washington Post interview and article in the YouTube chat. Okay, so our next question is in relation to the moon. You mentioned that the moon phases are, of course, important in the calendar for planting and harvesting. Could you discuss a bit more about how the moon and maybe the stars or planets or anything play a role in those decisions around harvesting and other important community events?
Sure. So again, relating back to stories that we do have about the sky, about stars, about constellations. Unfortunately, our storytelling only happens during wintertime. So I can't share any stories with you. And that's because we do it in the wintertime. Due to a lot of our stories have to deal with animals. And so what are animals doing in the wintertime? They're sleeping, they're hibernating, right? So otherwise, if they heard us talking about them, then they would come to us, is what we believe. But in reference to the question, to give a little summary, Coyote plays a really big part in our creation and also other stories, and he's known as a trickster. And there is a story that we do have that talks about how in his mischief and doing things that he's not supposed to, he creates the Milky Way. And there's different versions of that he creates the Milky Way with flour. There's another one with tapery beans, and we also have another story as well that involves the night sky with the Milky Way with a grandchild and a grandfather, and how that the tapery bean was created, but also too how that child became uh, a Milky Way or constellation, depending on which version you hear within the sky. So, that's how it relates. Also to, the moon and the phases of the moon. And like I said a long time ago, having to not only pay attention, but like being in tune with those phases of the moon is something that's been shared with me by my elders. And a perfect example is that when my daughter was born, I wanted her to have her middle name to be an Autumn and have that connection to, her culture. And I waited to name her, and the reason I did that was because I wanted to see when she was going to be born. Was she going to be born at nighttime? Was she going to be born early in the morning? And how that all turned out, right? She ended up coming a whole month early and very unexpected. And she came very early in the morning, but it was still dark out and it was a full moon. So with talking with my mom and consulting, that's how her middle name became to be what it is. And it's in reference to moonlight. So how the reflection from the moon comes. So again, having those little bit of details and within, naming your child or with your planting or just knowing the time of the year. So, and how you say it in autumn is Samasic, and that's what her middle name is. And it's in a sense referring to the reflection of the moon or the moonlight that shines down. And so again, she was born in late October. So and and again, just giving you an example of that. So hopefully I answered your question.
Oh, that was a brilliant response, Jacelle. That was a very vivid response too. I could actually picture the things that you were saying. That's amazing. Here in the chat, I have dropped a link to your official website of your nation, linked from the Kitt Peak and NOAO website. For those who are interested in learning not just in general about your culture, but more about your stories as related to the sky and animals, would they be able to find some of that on that website?
There might be some information on that. But again, being an oral society, a lot of our stories are told orally, not written down. But there are some that are. And I do have a visual. It's a painting that an Autumn artist did to highlight the story I mentioned with Coyote and creating the Milky Way that I'll be able to show you in a minute here.
That sounds great, Jacelle. Thank you. Thank you. That's it from the chat at the moment.
Okay. And so I wanted to share a little bit more too about our what we consider our new year with the saguaro fruit harvest. And again, just this time of year for us. And so I put this together. I wrote an article recently for the Desert Museum, and then a few years ago for Indian Countries Day, talking about the history of us being Autumn and being able to pick within the Saguaro National Park. So we have been harvesting the saguaro fruit for time immemorial, before there was even a Saguaro National Park, before it was Tucson Monument. And but after the creation of those places, then there was some tension, and also too at one point wanting to stop us from being able to continue our tradition. And thankfully, with help from Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall at the time, he didn't let that happen. And so Juanita Hill, and she's in this first black and white picture you see here, and she was very foundational in having a camp in the Saguaro National Park area. My family also had a camp, if you're familiar with Gilbert Ray Campground, in that area, and there's a lot of them that were in that area too, and they would go out by horse and wagon and go out and set up camp, and who knows, spend a month, maybe a couple weeks, however long, and harvesting, and then spending time and making it into, like I mentioned, syrup, jam, and then ceremonial wine if they were participating in that. And so nowadays there is still a saguaro fruit camp, or a bythuch camp, and that was again originally started by Juanita Hill in the early 1900s, and then it was passed on within her family, and then that was then passed on to another generation of family, and it's still going, and the camp is not only for O'odham, but there's groups throughout Tucson that come out and have the chance to be able to learn about our culture, about our tradition of harvesting saguaro fruit, and getting a chance to actually go out and pick. And in this other photo, the colored photos, is of Sally Estrada, and she had a camp that was really in close proximity to Juanita's camp, and but again, off in that Sandario mile wide area, if you're familiar, and that's where those camps would be. And it lived very traditional during that time, when more modern days you would go out and live traditionally, where you would basically have just what we call a wato, which is a wallless ramada, and that's where you would stay. You'd get up super early in the morning and go and harvest, and then come back, and throughout the day would cook, and then you could go out in the evening time again and harvest. And so that's typically how things would transpire at the camp.
Jacelle, we have another question from the chat.
Okay.
Okay, so we have Katie Smither. Katie wants to know, is there some place that these stories, like of the coyote and the Milky Way, that they're written down, or are they primarily kept just in oral history? And in the chat, Jacelle, I responded to her that yes, it does seem that those stories are kept primarily in the oral history. So I wanted to ask, is there another way of connecting with those stories, in maybe a virtual way, or are others allowed to maybe come to those stories?
So that's a really good question. This past December, I actually was a part of an event hosted by the Desert Museum, where myself and a friend of mine, Sissy Marie Wan, we actually did storytelling, and our theme was coyote, and talking about the Milky Way. And so we, with permission, of course, from our elders, were able to share versions of, again, two different stories, and also Sissy shared a song in O'odham that was okay with the public. And I'm not sure if that it was recorded and made public, but definitely paying attention to events that come up in the winter months that are public, like that. I would say would be your best option. There are some stories that are written down, but in a way that's kind of controversial, and the fact that there are certain things, especially our stories, that shouldn't be written down like that, and they should be just shared orally. But then also too, there's other versions of stories that are okay. So it just all depends. But I would say the best thing to be would be on the lookout for a public event like that, and they do happen. Like I mentioned last December.
Thank you so much for that, Jacelle. So would that be the Sonora National Park Museum? Is that what you said?
I said the Desert Museum.
The Desert Museum. I apologize, Jacelle. Thank you for correcting me. Yes, the Desert Museum. Okay, I will go ahead and drop a link to that here in the chat.
Okay, great.
And if maybe our host Rob can follow up with you to see, in fact, if your talk in December was recorded, and we can put that in the video description with your permission, if possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Jacelle.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that the talk is not on the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum's YouTube channel. I just looked, so I don't know if it's recorded somewhere else, but it's not there.
Okay. I that one might have not been recorded, but I told them I would be willing to come back and do it again, next this coming winter. So again, definitely keep an eye out on for those public events.
We appreciate the heads up on that, Jacelle. Thanks so much for that information.
Yeah, definitely. So talking more about sour fruit harvest and how I mentioned the different generations that are continuing this camp that is located in the Saguaro National Park West. And so here's a picture of Juanita Hill, and then here's a picture of Stella Tucker, and then Tanisha Tucker. And so they're all related. And if I recall correctly, Stella is Juanita's niece, and then Tanisha is Stella's daughter. And so since the passing of Stella, Tanisha has taken over, with her cousin and other family members to carry on the tradition of harvesting saguaro fruit, and then also the use of the family camp. And recently I saw that they were having groups come out again, unlike last year, not really doing that because of the pandemic. But great to see that there is groups going out again and being able to learn again about our tradition and the process that goes into making the saguaro fruit syrup and jam. And the syrup is easier to make than the jam. The jam is a longer process and takes days to do, whereas the syrup you can easily do within a day. And I recently started learning how to make it from my mom, and last year was the first year I really did it on my own. And of course I told I told my mom, I said I want to learn, and that way I can start helping more when it's time. And of course, I thought I was going to be sitting there just watching, but it's hands-on experience, and I ended up making most of the saguaro fruits syrup last year. And so this year was exciting because I was trying to remember everything and all the steps and everything that go into it, because it's a process. So having to boil it, so then the seeds and everything start to fall off, and also to the dirt and rocks. Then you use cheesecloth to strain it and get all the seeds out. And then after that, once you've strained it, then you have to put it back on to be boiled again. And then there's a whole process, and you got to boil it until it starts getting like thick, kind of like I don't know what you'd kind of compare it to. Maybe what you make candy apples with, and kind of making sure it's like thick and sticky in a sense, and it takes time, but also too, you can overcook it. And so you have to really pay attention on how you're doing that. And there's different ways you can do it on a stove, more contemporary, but traditionally it would be over open fire. And that's even harder because you have to maintain your fire and making sure it doesn't get too hot, and and you're not overcooking it. And so there's a whole process that goes into all of it. So it's an exciting experience, because again, realizing that I'm gonna, myself and my sister, we're next in line to know this and learn it, and be able to carry the tradition on with our children. And so I have a couple more slides and then I'll be done. But talking about our ancestral lands and what that looks like today. And so pre-contact, we inhabited an enormous area of land in the Southwest. So that orange dotted line is our ancestral land. So extended south to Sonora, Mexico, north to central Arizona, west to the Gulf of California, and east to the San Pedro River. And then the solid orange that you see is our reservation today. And then the blue dotted lines are villages and communities that are in Mexico. So when the Gadsden Purchase happened in 1854, it did split our ancestral land in half. And you had O'odham that did not have a say in what side of the border they wanted to be on. So you have one nation with two nationalities. You have U.S. citizens that are tribal members, and you have Mexican citizens that are tribal members. And it's a very complicated, complex topic to talk about, because the border infringes on our tribal sovereignty, but also too, you have human rights, also a big part of that. And then also too, it divided us, and it really hindered some of the families from continuing to know or even learn about our himatag, about our language, about our culture and tradition. So a lot has happened over time because of the border. But also too, we never were consulted. We were never told about the creation of the border. And I teach that in my classes at TOCC. So if you're interested, definitely look into taking a couple of the courses that we have there. And even more looking at contemporary, and this is a question that comes up a lot, is how the Tohono O'odham Nation, formerly known as the Papago Tribe of Southern Arizona, and our structure and how we are organized as a nation. So the Indian Reorganization Act that happened in 1934 allowed the creation of what we were formerly called Papago, which was given to us by the Spaniards, and having us become federally recognized. And in order for us at that time to become recognized, we had to create a constitution. And tribal member Peter Blaine Sr. was at the forefront of that for us, and really thankful for what he did, pushing to have the creation of a constitution for us. And in 1937, that's when we became officially federally recognized by the United States as a Papago tribe. And Papago translates to bean eater because one of our main staples of traditional food is tipuri beans. And so that was the name that was given to us. But in 1986, we adopted a new constitution. We revamped our original constitution, and then we also changed our name back to what we'd always called ourselves, Tohono O'odham. And as I mentioned too, about the villages and communities in Mexico, there's about 9. And so when we had that first constitution and structure in place, we just had a Papago council that was made up of 22 representatives. But in 1986, we adopted 3 branches of government, and we have an executive, legislative, and judicial. So that original Papago Council turned into our legislative council. So our executive has a chairman and a vice chairman, or in right now a vice chairwoman of the nation that oversees everything of the nation. We have our legislative, which is still made up of 22 representatives. That's 2 representatives from each of our districts. And our districts is best compared to states. So if you looked at the Tohono O'odham Nation as its own country, so we have our chairman and vice chairwoman. So that would be like the president and vice pres of the United States. And then, we have Congress. So that would be like our legislative council. And then our districts would serve as, or in comparison to states. And then within each district, with the exception of Sanavir, has multiple communities, also referred to as villages, whereas Sanavir, we're one district, one community. And so, and within each district, they have their own chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and also a council. So each district also essentially, governs themselves as well. And so that would be in comparison to, what the states have. And then even more so, you have your Tucson City Council, structured like that. And then we have our judicial, which houses the courts and judges. We also have a jail on the Tohono O'odham Nation. And our districts, going from east to west, we have Wak or Sanavir, which means where the water goes in, Shukdoak, which means Black Mountain, Wawagiwak, which is, or also referred to as Babakiri, which is constructed rock. That's also one of our sacred mountains. Gamchka Iwausik, which is Cells, it's our capital, and that means wedge turtle. Jukakuk, which is owl hooted. Goachi, big narrow. Safoitak, which means bitter field. Bisama'a, which means buffalo head. Hikuan, jagged cut. Goa'a, which means big pond. And then we have San Lucy. And Jukakuk and Goa'a are 2 of the districts that run along the U.S.-Mexico border. And here's a map showing you those districts. So again, here's Chukukuk district that runs along the border, and there's about 75 miles that of the U.S.-Mexico border that goes through the Tohono O'odham Nation. And then here's Goa'a district in purple right here. And then you can see Sanavir district over here. And then Tucson, and then Pasco Yaqui in between. And just to share a little, I know we're almost out of time, but just to share a little bit of more information that Kitt Peak National Observatory resides on the Tohono O'odham Nation, on one of our mountains that we call Iokam Tuwag, which refers to Manzanita Bush Mountain. And so it was in 1954 when you had different astronomers that got together and wanted to, were tasked with finding appropriate site for an observatory. And so they visited various sites in the Southwest, and Kitt Peak was one of great interest. And so not realizing or knowing that Kitt Peak is on our ancestral land, it's a sacred mountain to us, Meinl thought that it was actually on Forest Service land. And so he sought permission and wanting to climb the mountain. And then that led to the contact with the chairman of, we were then called Papago, and then also referring to the Shukdoak district, because that's where the mountain resides within that district boundaries. And so, you know, I'm rushing through this, but with, you know, that kind of started a dialogue between the astronomers and the Tohono O'odham Nation, and there were some hesitation to allowing the astronomers to climb the mountain, but in 1956, the Papal Council allowed testing of Kitt Peak and also to start negotiating a lease. And so astronomers, along with two tribal members and a photographer from the Arizona Daily Star, climbed up onto Kitt Peak by horseback. And then in 1958, a lease was drafted and signed, and a dedication of observatory took place in 1960. And, you know, the lease, it doesn't have an end date, so it's in perpetuity. And as long as the mountain is used for astronomical study and research and education. And, you know, as part of my job with Kitt Peak is to share this type of history, and also to help reestablish relationships and create new relationships between Kitt Peak, you know, the folks up on the observatory, and different parts of the Tohono O'odham Nation and different entities, departments, programs. And here's a photo of the signing of the lease, which I love old photos. So this is really cool that this was shared with me some time ago. And my last slide, here's the art by Tohono O'odham artist Jennifer Wan that depicts our Milky Way and having Coyote be part of that. And I just love her artwork and having this. So real quick, there are about 34, I've also seen about 35,000 enrolled tribal members, somewhere in there, with half living on the reservation and the other half living in urban areas. And another misconception that a lot of people think are, you know, only you hear about in the news is the main part of our reservation, which is the largest, but there are 4 land bases that make up the Tohono O'odham Nation. So you have Sanavir, then you have the main part of the reservation, you have Gila Bend area, and then also Florence. And that's what makes up our 2.8 million acres. And then, as I mentioned, there's about 75 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border that goes through the Tohono O'odham Nation. And our language is still spoken primarily by elders, and it was put on the endangered language list by UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And there are efforts being made right now, one of which is the creation of a language center that will be housed at the Tohono O'odham Community College, and with support from the Tohono O'odham Nation. And that was established last year. And that's something very exciting for us to have a center that's going to be built. And also there's a push to have more classes, language classes offered at our community college, and being able to provide more variety of type of language classes where you have elementary O'odham, but also to introducing conversation and other specific types of classes where you can learn certain things in regards to the language. Even for myself, I'm not a fluent speaker, but I'm trying to be and working on that. And even within my history and culture classes, I incorporate language and share what I do know, and have my students practice saying Ani Anap Jugi, which means my name is. And the class I just finished, one of my classes I just finished with this summer, I would have an O'odham words or phrases at the beginning of each class, and it was in relation to what we were reading that day and that week. And you know, being able to have them hear how to say different things. And so again, helping with our language and making sure that it's spoken on a daily basis and shared. And that's a big part of what I do. And I talked about this already. You know, we do have our stories and legends that are still told in our winter months. And, you know, Coyote, there's several stories that I tell, and Coyote's been always been my favorite because there's always something you can learn from him of, you know, if you do this, this is what happens. And, you know, lessons to be learned, and just overall hearing about him and the silly things that he does within those different versions. And again, you know, I love this artwork by Jennifer, um, and her depiction of that, of creating the Milky Way. And that is the end of my presentation. Is there any other questions?
Yes, Giselle, actually, we do have more questions, but I wasn't sure if Rob would like us to have those questions answered in the video description or not. But I will go ahead and read them so that you know what they are. First is from Katie Smither, and I believe you've kind of touched on this already. And she says, what are some ways that NOIRLab and astronomy staff working in Arizona and on the mountain can best support the nation, in your opinion? And then Martin Randall asked, linguistically, how does the O'odham language fit in with the surrounding nations and tribes? So I'm not sure if we have time for those responses, Rob, but if so.
I'm game if everyone else is, because this is obviously a topic that people want to know about. So they're asking lots of questions, lots of interesting questions.
All right, then, fantastic. Okay, so Jacelle, maybe we can start with Katie's question. How can NOIRLab and astronomy staff in Arizona and on the mountain best support the O'odham, in your opinion?
That's a good question. And the best way I would think is, of course, attending events and presentations to educate yourself. And that's, again, something that's part of my job, is to have these types of presentations, but also to share other events that are coming up so you can learn and you can have a better understanding. And then also to, you know, to respect the land and understand what it means to us, O'odham. And, you know, again, having that better grasp of understanding is super important. And that's really a big part of what I do, not only with Kitt Peak, but, you know, in general about, you know, presentations and anything else that I do, is having you have that understanding, having you respect it, and having a chance to ask questions, you know, and have these safe places where you feel okay to do that with me. And you know, I always tell people you can contact me too outside of presentations, and if you take a class with me, and I'm happy to have discussions with you so you better understand and I'm able to share what I know. And if there's something I don't know, I'm happy to go and seek that answer for you or connect you with somebody who does. Because again, that's I just want you to have not only a better understanding, but accurate information as well. And so I would say that would be a start. But also too, you know, if you're okay with going out to events when, you know, things do happen again on the nation, like we have our annual rodeo and fair and carnival and powwow and all that, you know, I would encourage you to go to these public events that are open. And then there's also other things that happen in Sanivere. We have a Sanivere co-op farm, and there's different events that take place too, but of course not through the pandemic. But, you know, once things start getting a little bit better, you know, and opening up to have those, you know, take advantage of those opportunities to go and talk with community and tribal members. And again, having that chance to educate yourself is super important.
Thank you, Jacelle. Katie says, awesome, thank you so much. And again, appreciate you all for organizing this event. Thank you, Katie, for participating and for your questions. Okay, Martin asks, and I'll just repeat his question, linguistically, how does the O'odham language fit in with surrounding nations and tribes? And we have one more question after that, Jacelle.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, we do have O'odham names for all of the surrounding mountains. And also too, there's a lot of words that you hear today that derive from O'odham words. So for example, how you say Tucson in O'odham is Jukshan. So you can see how that changed from Jukshan to Tucson. And then Arizona, which is how you say Arizona. So Arizona, Arizona. And then even with Tumamoc, if you've ever exercised up Tumamoc, it's actually Jumamoc. And Jumamoc translates to horn-toed mountain. Not too sure why it was called that. Maybe at one point in time there was a lot of, horned toads that were there. And then also Mount Lemon is called Babatuak, so Frog Mountain. Again, it could be, it maybe looked like a frog to somebody, or maybe there was a lot of frogs in that area, I'm not too sure. And then also too, just different parts of Tucson, we have, again, when you're in Tucson and any direction you look, there's mountain ranges, right? And so they all have sacred meaning to us. And, different, just again, with a different terrain and how, it changes. But again, no matter where you go on our ancestral land, we have all the different mountains and all their names and significant meaning and sacredness to us. And again, like I mentioned too, with even where Kitt Peak is, it's called Ilgam Duag. And, that's a very important mountain specific, especially for and specifically for the Shukduak district. And, some mountains also have their own songs or their own stories as well. And so that's how our language connects to our surrounding areas. But also too, like I mentioned at the beginning, we do have different dialects within the Tohono O'odham Nation, and how people pronounce things differently from, say, in Sanavir than they do on the west end of the reservation. Also too, in Sanavir, we talk a lot slower than, say, someone who's from the Hikwan district on the west end of the main part of the reservation. They talk really fast, but also too, but we still can all have conversations. We can still all talk to each other. Same with what are now like our sister tribes with Gila River and Salt River, and so hopefully that answered your question a little bit better. As in reference to like other tribes, there are similarities. Like within my classes, I've had students this past summer that are, from other tribes within Arizona, and they're like, they like to share their similarities of where they come from and also the differences too,
That's perfect, Jacelle. Perfect. Yes, because Martin actually put a follow-up question in the chat, but you hit it right, the nail right on the head, Jacelle. Thank you so much. And our final question actually came a little bit earlier from Crystal Woden. Earlier, you were referring to the consistency of something you were preparing, and you compared it to like the outside of the candy apple. And so our Crystal asked, is it like making caramel, perhaps?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to reference. Our syrup doesn't come out as thick like that. But again, if you've made candy apples or caramel apples, and you got to sit there and really stir and get it to a certain consistency. And that's essentially how it is when you're making the syrup, and making sure that, because it's really watery. And another thing I didn't mention is that we don't put anything into making any of our syrup, our jam, or the ceremonial wine. The only thing we really put into it is water. There's no sugar. There's nothing, preservatives, additives, nothing. It's just naturally sweet. And so it's at first, after you strain it, all the seeds out of it, and you put it back to be boiled a second time, it is like really watery. And we always joke and say it looks like Kool-Aid, red Kool-Aid. But then that's when you're boiling it. And the batches that we made last time, or this summer, we had to boil it for roughly like an hour and a half to 2 hours. But after that first hour, you got to really sit there and pay attention and stir it and watch how it thickens. And then it also starts to get kind of sticky. And so once it gets to that, then it's done. And so, but it gets tricky because sometimes, you're just kind of a little excited and you're like, okay, I think it's done. But then it ends up being a little bit too watery. So then you can put it back on to boil it. But then you really have to watch it, because if you do it a little too long, then like I said, you burn it in a sense. And so it's a really interesting process to be there and having to, constantly check it and say, okay, let's go another 10 minutes. Okay, I think we're close. Oh no, you got to go another 15 minutes, and just really being there for that second half of when you're putting it all together. And I also too, we collected 4.5 quarts this past harvest this summer, and we ended up, after straining it and the whole process was done, we came out with 32 ounces of the syrup. And that was what we do is we put them in mason jars and we can them. So then that way you can use it throughout the whole year. And it's great on pancakes, waffles, eating it, just a spoonful by itself is amazing. The best way I like it is dipping it with a tortilla and eating it. So that's
That
kind of
sounds delicious.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jacelle, and thank you to everyone in our YouTube audience for watching, but also especially for your questions and comments. All right, over to you, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Giselle. That was fantastic. And we'll have, when we post this video, we'll have all the links in there so people can see the Desert Museum. And feel free to, I'd also encourage people to watch the NOIRLab website, our Facebook page and Twitter, because anything you pass to us for any events, we will post there so people can find it. So just please let us know what you're doing, and we'll repost it for you. So anyway, yes. And Jamika, would you like to tell us what's in store for Live from NOIRLab next week?
Yes, Rob. Next week, coming up on Live from NOIRLab at Hawaii, our host will be Leinani Losi, and I will be moderating. Our guest will be Rich Matsuda from the WMKEC Observatory.
Okay, super. Thank you. And thank you once again, Giselle. And with this, we'll sign off.